seems to be a lot of confusion out there right now about saturated fat and cholesterol. For years, the consensus, the scientific nutrition consensus, was that saturated fat was bad, high LDL is bad, and then suddenly some studies came out that caught the attention of the media, and there were a lot of headlines and a lot of articles written about this idea that everything you ever heard about saturated fat is wrong. Cholesterol is something that we need and it's good, and you shouldn't worry about saturated fat, that actually saturated fat is a health food. So Can you walk me through how we got to this point and perhaps clarify the record or share your perspective on this?
I remember I was in Davos at the World Economic Forum 2.5 years ago when Time Magazine put a stick of butter on their cover.
Butter is back.
Yeah, and Nancy Gibbs was the editor-in-chief at the time, and she was doing this one-on-one interview with me, and she said, "So what do you think of our cover?" And I said, "Well, not so well." And she said, "Well, why not?" I said, "Well, because it's not true. The studies are showing that saturated fat doubles your risk of Alzheimer's disease. For every one pat of butter, your risk of premature death from all causes, when you look at 300,000 people in the Harvard Physicians and Harvard Nurses Health Study, goes up by 5%. So these things really are important. Now, cholesterol is good in the sense that your body needs cholesterol. It's a building block for, sex hormones and nerve coverings and all kinds of things. And precisely because it's so important, your body will make all the cholesterol it needs. The dietary requirement for cholesterol is zero. But getting all this extra cholesterol is, we found in our studies that there was a dose-response relationship between the intake of dietary cholesterol and dietary fat and changes in the blockages in the arteries. This was also found in what was called the class study that David Blankenhorn did at USC many years ago. It was one of the first studies to show that the drugs could actually cholesterol-lowering drugs could reverse heart disease. And he found that the same dose-response relationship, the more fat you consumed, including saturated fat, and especially saturated fat, the more clogged your arteries become. Mm-hmm. And even a single meal, as we've been talking about, makes a difference. So, I'd love to be able to tell people that fat is good, that it's all sugar, but it's not. An optimal diet is low in both.
On the animal protein issue, is it something inherent in animal protein itself, or is it everything that comes with the animal protein? Like, what is the difference between how the body metabolizes animal protein versus plant protein? Or is it like the saturated fat and cholesterol that generally is conjoined with the intake of animal protein?
Well, animal protein is harmful, and plant-based protein is not only not harmful, it's actually protective. There are literally hundreds of thousands of substances in fruits and vegetables and whole grains and legumes and soy products that have anti-cancer, anti-heart disease, and anti-aging properties. Things like phytochemicals, bioflavonoids, carotenoids, retinols, isoflavones, genistein, lycopene. There's a whole alphabet soup of these things. And where do you find them? With few exceptions, you find them in plant-based foods. The animal-based foods, besides being high in saturated fat and you only get dietary cholesterol in animal products, is the animal protein itself is inflammatory. And in our new book, part of what this kind of unifying theory that we're putting together for the first time is, why is it that these same lifestyle changes are so powerful? The more diseases we study, the more underlying mechanisms we look at, the more reasons we have to explain why these changes are so powerful. And it's because although we tend to think of heart disease as being different than diabetes, different than prostate cancer, and different than Alzheimer's disease and so on, the radical idea here is this unifying theory is that they're not. They're different expressions of the same underlying disorders. Mm-hmm. The mechanisms like chronic inflammation, oxidative stress, over stimulation of the sympathetic nervous system, changes in the microbiome, changes in, as we've been talking about, in gene expression and telomeres and angiogenesis. And each of these mechanisms, in turn, is affected by what we eat, how we respond to stress, how much exercise we get, and how much love and support we have. And so, seen in this larger context, the animal protein activates all of these different mechanisms in negative ways, which is what makes it harmful, independent of the fact that it's also high in saturated fat, dietary cholesterol, and other things like that. Mm-hmm.